I'm still not used to these braces and how god awful I can't stand them. Can't
No, oh,
wait
your
to get these
braces.
off. Yeah. I had a friend of
I
mine
know.
who I hadn't seen in 20 years came over a couple of days ago, and she's similar age to me. She also has braces, and I was like, "Isn't this the worst?" She's like, "Yes, I hate it." Being in her 40s and having braces.
I know. I want to get mine again. I had them when I was 15. Started, I think, 14,
As
got them
most
all
people do,
at
they're
17. And
kids.
yeah, now I'm like, I need a whole round of it again. But
Oh,
I was allergic to them when I had them. That found out the first time. So I broke out
oh,
so
weird.
badly and had to get like a special metal put in mine because of my allergies.
Oh, that's
That was
wild.
fun in high school.
I'm sure that's whatever they used to use has changed a lot
I would hope
since
so.
then, I'm sure.
I hope. If you hear
But
any
yeah, it's the
strange
worst.
noises, it's my dog. He's here. My son is at school.
Okay.
I'm like,
If you
it's
hear any
more.
strange noises from here, something's wrong because there's no one here except me. My kids are with mom. So,
Okay. So it's really simple, just questions back and forth. I'm going to ask about your single parent restart. And then I have questions for you too as well. So it's going to be some about entrepreneurship and then single parent life, like the divorce, things of that nature.
yeah,
Okay.
cool.
I
Sounds
used to
like a blast.
Yes, all the fun things. So I'm just gonna get started, and I usually used to start off super formal, but it's easier just to jump right into the swing of things. So Zach, thank you for joining me today for another episode of AM Blended Families podcast.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. And so I came across your profile many moons ago. I was literally trying to do the math the other day to figure out how long I had been following you, and I couldn't figure out if it was before I got divorced or if I had my son already or not. I have no idea. I know it's been a long time. My son is 14. I don't remember. And so I found you, of course, through photography.
Yeah.
And so just was been following your journey along and noticed that you, I don't know, say unfortunately, fortunately, that you're divorced now and
Mm,
you all have children. And so you are going through the blended family scenario now, co-parenting.
mm.
There's parallel parenting. There's all the things. So tell me a little bit about yourself before we just dive into everything.
Yeah, maybe like a good little 10,000 foot view would probably be helpful. So, yeah, I'm Zach Gray. I was married for 16 years with Jody, my wife, for about 19 years. We dated and were engaged for over a 3 year period. And that was back when I was a professional musician. So I
Oh,
live in Nashville, Tennessee. I came to
wow.
Nashville playing music for a
Wow.
Christian artist on a Christian record label. And I have this really wild, interesting story. And I'm sure some of this probably ties into this feeling of what it's like to take on the load of being a single parent, to have your marriage not work, the feelings that come along with that. So I grew up with just my mom
Okay.
since I was about 6 years old. My dad left my mom, had an
Okay.
affair,
Uh,
and always in the back of my mind was one, I didn't know what it was like to have that kind of masculine presence in my life. And two, if I ever got married, I was never going to leave my kids under any circumstance because my
mhm.
dad and my mom didn't just get divorced. I didn't see my dad but a handful of times from age 6 to 19 years old. So I had very few men in my life kind of telling me, here's what you should do and here's what you shouldn't do
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
life. And that would actually be great to ping back to later on in the conversation about
Okay.
how I try to instill some of these really important key things into my kids, of which I have four. So I ended up in Nashville, Tennessee. I was dating, then engaged to Jody, who I'd met randomly. It's a very odd story, but I used to date her sister, and that's how I knew who
Wow.
she was, which is crazy and it's funny and it's wild, but that's how I know her. And I, fell head over heels over her. She's very talented. She looks sort of exotic. She's beautiful. She's skilled. She's super smart. I never went to school, which is a whole nother crazy story. I've only been to the third grade. And Jody is a college grad, 4.0, full ride scholarship in an elite school brain. So she's got the book smarts. I have more of the street smarts.
Mhm.
And when we got together, we had this really great combination. We're young she's in her early 20s. I'm in my mid 20s. And unknowingly, we had this great skill to build something together, which was business. And we started in photography, as you said. That's how you
Yes.
heard about us. And we quickly had this kind of skyrocket effect where I grew up super poor, never made more than $12,000 a year. And within a year of starting our photography business, we were making six figures. Then I wanted to help people, and we started helping people and creating content and courses. We built software, and we had this amazing ability to build this great business. And in the process, not realizing we were probably missing some really key things in the marriage, in the relationship side of things. And it's easy when you're really busy and you feel very successful. And especially when you don't know any different. And maybe a lot of people that grew up sort of the way I did, which was very church, Pentecostal. Jody was sort of the first every serious thing of any kind. Exactly. So I didn't know, was this the way it should be or wasn't it the way it should be? So then we can dive into the details as we get into the conversation. But that's a bit of the big view. We had money and success and businesses and a fancy house in Franklin, Tennessee, and cars and motorcycles, starting to have kids. And there was some really important key thing down there in the core of the relationship that was destined for disaster. And unfortunately, that was the case. And so that's a bit of where we are today. That 4 years later, Jody and I split up in 2020. And so it's been quite the 4-year journey since then.
And is that part of you all realizing that something was missing? Is that how you all ended up doing something that I've always wanted to do all my life? Was that traveling with the RV?
That was definitely the Hail Mary, I would say.
Okay.
It wasn't sort of like plan A. It was like, if this doesn't work, nothing's going to work kind of thing.
Okay.
So our serious trouble in our relationship, I would say, started in 2015, probably. We were pregnant with our second daughter, or with our first daughter in London. And I distinctly remember this. And I don't know, maybe you should give me some guidelines here, like how serious of a conversation do you want to have? Because I'll basically talk about anything.
I like
this
to
is the
open
challenge here too, because I gotta be very careful to also make sure I do a good job of protecting everybody else's integrity as well.
Right.
Remember, this is my perspective.
Right.
But it is true because it happened to me. So give me some guidelines for that.
So whatever you're comfortable with sharing, I get it too, because I'm the same way. While I'm an open book, I'm also trying to protect the other side as well. And so, but as comfortable as you are.
Okay. So keep that in mind, everybody. Like I definitely have a heart and a goal to help other people that have been through this. It's really, really hard. And I think there's a growing number of resources out there for people in general. I think there's a growing number of resources for women. I see a little bit more of a lack maybe for men.
Most definitely.
And that's something I think I have a passion behind, because how do you rise up from a really challenging thing and not, one, do the same thing again and just because you went the opposite direction, and then not become really toxic in the process, because it's easy to get angry and bitter and all the crazy things and then become a bad co-parent. And I will tell you that before we get into details, let me tell you the good things. Jody and I co-parent pretty darn well, and I'm super happy about that. And it's really important. It's really, really, really important, because the kids, none of this is their fault. It has nothing to do with them, but they are stuck in the middle of it.
Exactly.
And they have to pack up their stuff and move every week or twice a week. And that sucks. And that's really hard. So we co-parent really well. The kids are doing really good. But back to 2015. And I'm an extremely transparent person, and I realize this is something that's going to be online. So take everything I say with this is Zach's perspective. Jody has her own perspective. Jody has her own reasonings, and I don't know all of those reasonings.
Okay.
But in 2015, we were pregnant with London, our second kid, and we had went through a very traumatic experience trying to start to have kids in 2012. We had 3 miscarriages in a row, all in 1 year. It was really devastating. There was a lot of trauma experiences behind it, and unresolved, because you'd have all these feelings. You're calling your family and saying, we're going to have a baby. And then you have to call them and say, that's not happening.
Right.
And as that kept happening, it just kind of kept building and building. It became really tough. So in 2013, we had our son Jackson. after Jody had had a minor surgery. There was actually something wrong, and they corrected it. And then we were able to get pregnant and go to term and have Jackson. And that was a really wild 2 years because there was so much fear, especially in my heart, about losing him that I had a hard time connecting with him. And then when I did, it was like really powerful bond that the two of us have together. And he started showing me all these things that I was undealt with from when I was a kid with my dad. And I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. Kids will do these radical things to us. So in 2015, we're excited. We're building a software company. Our business is going well. We've got this great house. I think the marriage is pretty good. I couldn't have pointed to something and said this was wacky, you know. We had pretty regularity in all the marital parts of the relationship that you should have. And in 2015, we're in our big fancy house. She was 3 or 4 months pregnant, I remember. And Jody was always like easy pregnancies, glow. She loves being pregnant. She's designed for it. She's super good at it. And she loves it. And I remember we were sitting up on the second floor of our house, and I was like laying on the floor or something, and she was standing above me talking about something. She had come out of the office. And all of a sudden I just looked at her and I was like feeling attracted to her. And I kind of like, and I will tell you this is something I've learned since we've gotten divorced. And maybe this is a church effect thing, but we were really, really bad at being very clear about sex.
Oh, okay.
Having just normal conversations, open conversations, how somebody feels, how somebody doesn't feel, what somebody wants, what somebody doesn't want, all those kind of things. It was always, you would kind of like put a feeler out and then see how that would go. You know, it was very, not subconscious, but subverted like that. It was very odd. I didn't realize it was odd because that's how we were. But it was. So I was kind of like flirting in the way that I was trying to let her know, hey, I'm interested in you. And I remember her specifically saying, what was the phrase that she used? Because I'm still trying to decipher what it means. She said, I'm only going to do what feels congruent. And I was like, she had never talked to me like that. We had had a very regular sex life, like clockwork, like unusually regular. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Because I'm a very I'm the most non-aggressive person you've probably ever met.
Okay.
Never been in a fight in my life, you know, and I'm not about to get in a fight with my wife. That's for sure. So I was like, okay, that's how you feel. Let's figure that out. And that day turned into about a year of us not sleeping together anymore.
Oh, wow.
And I was really confused about it. And that sort of started this process of discovery of all this other stuff that really destroyed my masculinity, I would say, over the next couple of years.
Okay.
And that was the starting point.
Okay. Okay. So that's what started it, and then led to what you said, your Hail Mary of going on the RV trip, and then I guess I take it that didn't work out, so it led to where you all are today.
Yeah, we spent about 6 figures worth of money over the next couple of years, and a lot of time, up to more than 2 days a week, doing counseling and coaching. You know, when this happened and it started to drag on for a couple of weeks, I immediately said, obviously there's something wrong, because if she doesn't feel safe to connect with me like that, something significant is happening. So we started going to something called emotionally focused therapy, which was really good. It was about us connecting emotionally. And we had a great counselor. They have a very high success rate of helping people to get reconnected to each other. And in that process, I started discovering, like I said, all these things, which we can dive in any of those details if you want to. And then in 2016, there was a huge, massive problem that had happened. And then we kind of limped along for 2 or 3 years as the business just started to crater. And then in 2019, sort of desperate, because I was emotionally checked out of the business, emotionally distraught over the marriage. We were running out of money. I just couldn't work anymore, and she wasn't working hardly at all. We sold our house because we had all this equity in it. And I said, let's just take a year and go on a sabbatical, we called it, and just go out west. And she agreed to do that. We bought an RV and a truck and sold everything we owned, packed up all our stuff that we didn't sell, and literally got into 250 square feet for a year. And I knew something. It was either it was going to intensify the conversation. We were going to duke it out, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and figure it out, and realize we got to stick together, or it was going to end. And sure enough, 2 days before we got back, she decided to leave, and we got divorced.
So now you're here, you're divorced, and we both know
I'm still
that
here
yes.
somehow.
It's a hard process. I know for myself, when I divorced from my ex-husband, my son was he was about 3 months old when we decided. I always tell people we were together longer as boyfriend and girlfriend than we were as husband and wife. And he was about 3 months old. And so as I was saying, he's 14 now. But it was hard. But one of the things, that he said to me and that he stuck by and has lived up to this day was that our son would never suffer because of our decision to not stay together. And
That's
so it was hard, but once we got through, because there's so many different emotions of a roller coaster you go through when something that you thought was going to be forever is no longer forever. So now we have to adjust to this new norm of life. So what's been one of the most challenging things for you transitioning in from husband and wife to now to being a single father?
Well, I mean, you have obviously a lot more years of recovery and experience with this than I do. I'm 4 years, you're 14-ish
Right.
years into this. One, I will tell you, and maybe you would agree with me that wound sort of like, maybe it will scar, but I feel like it's probably never go away. There's always a piece of that, especially if you have kids, because it's always there. There's always a piece, there's some energy there. That's what one of my coaches would always say. Just pay attention to the energy that you're feeling. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is. And what's it telling you?
Right.
So I would say in the very beginning, because I've definitely gone through a lot of stages. And I'd say in the very beginning, if this is someone listening to this and saying, this is just happening to me, or I'm just in the beginning of the process, the hardest thing for me was the first time I dropped off my kids. That just broke my heart. I couldn't believe it. I was extremely embarrassed that the relationship failed.
That's a big thing.
Like I felt so lesser than that I couldn't keep it together, and I felt like it was my job to keep it together. And I was never going to leave. Jody left me. I was never going to leave no matter how bad it got, because in my mind, that was me abandoning my family.
That's one of our similarities right there. My ex-husband would have never left. He would have stayed the way it was if I didn't say, no. If I didn't initiate it, it wouldn't have happened either, because he wasn't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, and I think, maybe there's a little bit of truth to that maybe men are a little bit more stubborn in that way, where they just don't want it to fail, even though maybe they're unwilling or unable or don't know how to figure out how to adapt to the needs of their partner, And I think at that point, and I've said this analogy many times, that if you head down to the ocean, go swim in Seaside in Florida, which is the closest ocean to me here in Nashville, and it's a yellow flag day, which basically means there's some waves, but it's not crazy. You get out there, you can get beat up by the waves a little bit, and you get tired, you come back in. Anything in life can be like that, where you go into something that's more challenging, it takes a lot out of you, and you need a bit of a respite, but you keep battling that thing, and until you get to some of these really great green flag days where the water's calm and everything feels, it's the picture perfect moment. But if you get caught in a riptide in the ocean, if you don't get out of that riptide, you are going to die. And Jody and I were at the point of riptide. It was like that. It was like something had to be so drastically different at this moment for this relationship to work. And that's why we actually named our youngest son. All of our kids were named after a state of our relationship, believe it or not.
Wow.
So Jackson, Jaxon, means the Lord has been merciful, because we lost 3 kids, and that's where we were. My youngest son, my last born, his name is Phoenix. And there's a reason for that, because we knew the relationship had to die the way it was, because it would never work. And maybe we would rise back up together with it, or maybe we wouldn't. And the latter is, of course, the truth. So I think that's really important to understand. So, we were in a riptide, and that's a big cause of and once I got out of the relationship, out of the riptide, and kind of like came up for a breath, I was like, whoa, here's all these things about myself that need to change. Here's all these things that we did in the relationship that are wacky and super toxic and really bad. And here's some of the good things that I can sort of see postpartum, And I did a lot of work on myself, a lot of transformation work. So in the beginning, dropping the kids off, that was terrible. The next thing was probably sitting in a little apartment alone. After living in a big fancy house and having everything and having a business, now I'm jobless, my kids are gone, and I'm sitting in this little apartment in Franklin. And all I can think of is, I don't know what to do with all this weight. It just felt like the weight was on me. And Jody and our relationship was my life. Mm-hmm. And once I realized that I could take the failure of the marriage and have it be a part of my life, and that there was other life could be lived, that's when I sort of came back to life.
Nice. And for the dynamic of how you fathered your children or parent your children, how did things like with that change? How did you deal with that?
I think in the very beginning, it was more like, maybe you can relate to this. Mm-hmm. There's, in life, work, business, relationships, there's two modes, mm-hmm. survival or thriving. Uh-huh. You're either in survival mode in an area or you're thriving. Mm-hmm. In finance, it's simple. If you have margin between you and your bills, you're thriving. It right. doesn't have to, you don't have to be a millionaire. You just have to have margin. Mm-hmm. That's safety.
Taking it. Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing in relationships. Are you in survival mode where you're literally just trying to make it through the day? That's how it was a lot in the very beginning, I would say. It was very much survival, because not only Jody and I separated in July of 2020, but we weren't divorced until 2022. And so you're going through all of these crazy things like discovery, and her writing 42 reasons why you're a bad person. Because we went from this amazingly equitable, fair, 50-50 for 7 or 8 months, and we had no lawyers. It was me and Jody. It's not going to work, but we love the kids, and we got to do what's best for the kids. That's 50-50 time, splitting everything we have down the middle, because we both worked in the business all the time ever since we were married. And then I made a huge mistake, which was I went out on a date. And maybe she would say different, but my experience was I went out on a date, some friends of ours bumped into me, and we were like at the end of the first divorce. We were like about to just do the last bit of work, send it off to the judge. And we were just using a mediator. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go out on a date. Went out on a date, like didn't know what I was doing. The first time I was free in 20 years of my life. I'd never been on a date as an adult other than with Jody, basically. Mm-hmm. And bumped into some friends of ours. And within the next week, Jody hired a lawyer, started a contested divorce, and started saying all these reasons why I shouldn't have the kids 50-50. And that was really crazy. So I would say that whole thing, the details really don't matter, but everybody has some thing like that, mm-hmm. where there's some piece of chaos in the divorce process that is really hard to manage. So when I'm with my kids, I was just like, hey guys, and making them food, and we're homeschooling. Mm-hmm. This last year we stopped finally, but we have been homeschooling the kids, so we're with them all the time. I work from home, so I'm just with the kids when I'm with them. She's with the kids all the time when she's with them. And then when I'm not with the kids, I'm just kind of like, holy cow, this is crazy. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm with the kids, it's just like, what's the best experience I can give them? But inside, like how I felt wasn't necessarily matching what I was saying and doing all the time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was really, really difficult. And I think that was a very challenging thing in the beginning of that process, is to navigate through that. And the reality is just, it's really hard, and you need good support, and you need 2 or 3 really good friends that will help you through that.
I've definitely found my village has been everything for me. And without my village, I don't know how I would have gotten through certain phases of the whole process of things, because there were a time in the very beginning when I was just in such a dark place, and I am such a positive, uplifted person. I always try to
Hmm.
see the
It
better
seems
in
that way.
everybody. Thank you. And for that period, it was a little bit of time that I was just so angry. And
Yeah.
I found that my anger was something that you actually mentioned. I was more embarrassed about our relationship ending than I was about
Hmm.
our relationship actually ending. I was more worried about what people were going to think about the fact that we did not stay together than I was actually worried about us not being together anymore. And
Hmm.
so I know for me, once I got over that, we were able I was able to get back to feeling like a better version of myself, because I always knew that if I'm not feeling my best, I'm not parenting at my best. And so that was a big thing for me. The next challenge I faced moving along was um, co-parenting issues,
Hmm.
or disagreements. We had to get into a rhythm where, I am lucky that my ex-husband and I, he's still one of my biggest cheerleaders to this day. We have a super unusual co-parenting situation where I know I always tell people, well, your situation does not have to look like mine. I know I am definitely not the norm because we get along very well. We travel together. He's remarried. My son has two little sisters, and we live like three doors away from each other.
Wow.
Yeah, so I know it's a super unique situation, but I always tell, I don't expect your situation to look like mine. But what do you all find, or what do you find that you do in terms of communication? How important is that with you and Jody now, especially if it's a situation with the kids where you don't agree on something?
Well, one, when you started talking about sort of anger versus embarrassment, not to jump back for a second, but
Uh-huh,
I
mhm,
think you really hit on something that a lot of
mhm,
people might really connect to. Here's my question for you, and maybe we could both answer it because you
uh-huh,
have such great experience with this, which is you maybe recognize, like, I'm not just angry at that person because it's very easy, and I think everybody does this. The
mhm,
relationship fails and it's their fault, or it's
mhm,
mostly their fault. It's the
mhm,
other person because that helps us make sense of our little world, right?
mhm.
And then you kind of have this realization, as I did, I feel really embarrassed about this. Like, there's something in me that isn't enough, right? It's like, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm not
Mhm,
worthy of being loved really well, or
mhm,
not worthy of sticking it out for, or
mhm,
changing, or whatever the thing is. And my question to you is,
mhm.
like, what solved that for you? Like, what was the thing that helped you to walk through that?
I think for he and I, honestly, I always knew we didn't belong together. And it was
A
reaching,
fundamental misalignment,
mhm,
because that's what I
like,
talk about now, is alignment. It's
oh
so
yes.
important.
We are two amazing individuals. We just all, and then I will go back to say, not only did we did not belong together as husband and wife, but our son was a purpose of ours to have him. Um, because literally once we had him, our relationship was done. And
Hmm.
he is an amazing person, truly amazing. We have different values, and I think our different values actually help to make our son a better person because he has a little bit of his dad in him, and he has a little bit of me in him as
Interesting.
well. And there were just certain things that more so, I'm more religious than he is. He's not at all. And I never thought that both people needed to be, but I think in some sort of fashion, and when I hope to remarry again one day, that other person has to have some sort of religion. They don't have to be overly religious, but they have to actually have a belief in God or
Hmm.
something. And his dad doesn't. And I won't say that he
Yeah.
doesn't believe in God. He's just never been religious, and I am. And so my
Yeah.
son, he definitely, that's something he thrives and he longs for as well. So he and I still keep that up. But I never saw it as a problem because my parents are I grew up in a blended family, and my dad never went to church, but my mom always did. So I grew up going to church with my mom, and I'm like, well, my dad doesn't go to church, so it's not a big deal that the person I'm with doesn't really have a a strong religious base. And even though his mom goes to church as well, but his dad didn't either. So it was just, I think for us, really, that was one of the biggest disconnects. And while I thought it was something little, it ended up being something really big. And and so there was always just something missing there. And once I could admit it to myself that I've always known that I was just being a stubborn Scorpio, and I wanted what I wanted because, this was my high school sweetheart. We went to college, and now we
Yeah.
graduated from college, and now we're going to, get married, because it was a few different couples from high school with us who all dated in high school, went to college, and then afterwards we're getting married. And I was embarrassed that, okay, but we're the ones who didn't make it. And so once I got over that and realized nobody was judging us, it was only me. It was my fear of what everybody else was going to think. As long as I was okay, as long as my son was okay, as long as he's okay, we were going to be fine. And again, for me, I guess the biggest thing was just realizing that I've always known all along that there was something missing. But he just was not going to let go of it. And he was okay with not letting go. Even though he was completely checked out, it was like I just refused to have my son grow up in a household that was just that dysfunctional. It was dysfunctional because he's sleeping downstairs on the couch. I'm sleeping in the bedroom. We're barely speaking to each other at this point. It was just turning toxic, and I didn't want it to get worse than that. So while I knew and realized that he wasn't going to say those words that, this isn't working anymore, that I was going to have to be the one to step up and say it, because I just didn't want him to grow up thinking that this was normal.
Yeah. That's super good. I think for me, it was like I had done some coaching right when we got back from our RV trip. I did an 8-week coaching thing while we were doing a separation that Jody wanted to do for 60 days. And then at the end of it, she said, I'm going to decide if I want to be married. And at the end of that, she filed for divorce. And had already had an apartment and the whole deal, when she came back, basically. We basically didn't talk for 60 days. And during that 60 days, I started doing some coaching, and it had this huge, I'd done a ton of coaching before that and all kinds of different things. But I sort of feel like I always sort of defaulted back to just how I was. This, on the other hand, for whatever reason, just completely changed so many things in my life that are still a part of my life. And what I learned in this coaching from my coach, Jamie George, was healthy relationships exist in 3 pieces, which is ownership. What have I contributed to this? Can I own it? So somebody calls something out on me, it may be half true, but if there's the half true part, can I own that? Mm-hmm. And if somebody doesn't own their stuff, they're impossible to deal with. So ownership. Boundaries is the second one. How do I set a healthy boundary where it doesn't go against my personal value system? And then the last one is, so ownership, boundaries, and the last one is negotiation. Then how do we negotiate? Meaning, I think in a relationship, and I didn't know this when I was very young and Jody and I got together, that there's things that are from an alignment perspective that are critical. These are deal breakers. And for you, it could be spirituality. It could be your parenting philosophy. It could be the way that somebody talks to your kids, whatever. Things that are if this happens, it's a no, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's a bunch of these things that are negotiable. And if both of us are willing to negotiate on these smaller things, like who does the dishes and how do we keep the house, and things that shouldn't be deal breakers but become deal breakers because we never negotiate to a healthy median, mm-hmm. That's critically important. And then at the center of that, and I think this was the big thing for me, was identity. Who am I? Because when Jody left, it was like, oh, I guess I'm nobody. This was my whole life. It's like, no. Even marriage and even my kids, that's a component. It's a big component, but it's a component of my life. Mm-hmm. Meaning I have to have something bigger than myself that I'm turning to. Because mm-hmm. if it's just me, this ain't going to work very well. And that can be anything. And my coach, even though he's, spiritual, it's like, that can be a higher power. That can be something bigger than you. That can be the universe. Mm-hmm. You got to decide who that is and what that belief system is. And then you go, well, that's actually who I am. Now I can rise from the dead after a really bad failed relationship like I had. And that was really powerful. So just for anybody out there listening to this that may go, man, I feel like my life has ended or my world has sort of crumbled apart. That's not untrue. But we've also built our lives many times on this relationship. And when the relationship fails, it feels like we have failed. And the reality is that we have a lot more innate value than just the health of our relationships around us. And that was a game changer for me personally. And then I think you then jump to co-parenting. So let's kick it with the co-parenting.
I mean, there's so many different components to life after divorce with the kids. And so, like, what are some of the things you found challenging after divorce? And that means in terms of co-parenting and in terms of yourself as a father and as a man and as an entrepreneur. Like, how did you begin to rebuild your new norm?
Well, that's great. One of the challenges, I didn't realize this, and maybe I allowed it. And remember, this is my perspective, but my experience. So I can speak to my experience. I'm not going to say Jody was blank, okay? Even though I may think it and believe it, I'm going to say my experience was I felt a lot of constraint in the relationship. And if I didn't do the right things that Jody deemed right, I wasn't going to live up to her expectation. She wasn't going to be happy with me. And that was in a lot of things. When I got up, when I went to bed, who I hung out with, what shows I watched, when we walked through the mall, what stores I looked at. I mean, I'm not kidding.
Okay.
To the point where I was in counseling after a year of counseling, crying because I realized I felt pressure when I was going to the bathroom.
Wow.
Because she was like, you're supposed to be doing something else right now. Get out of there. And I remember crying about this, and she was laughing in counseling. And I was like, this is actually how I feel. I feel so, and with everything, with money, like that's another big one, like how you handle money. And how we handled money, Jody will say we agreed on the budget. Yes, we agreed on the budget. But what I will say is Jody handled the money and we did what Jody said, and I didn't want to go outside of that. And anytime I felt like we should even attempt it, it was a huge blow up of a deal, even when it was inconsequential financially. We were making, here's an example. We were making $400,000 a year. We made $400,000 in 2012. And I had a $100 a month personal spending budget. So, and I would go to the bank, and Jody would write all the bills, like I need this many 10s, this many 20s, Zach's personal spending, it said on it, Jody's personal spending, date night money. And I would hand that to the banker who knows us well, because we bank there all the time. And they would chuckle at me. Oh, you get $100? And they knew, they could see, like, we got 6 figures of emergency fund just sitting in our bank account. And all this, 30, 40,000 a month was coming in or whatever. And they were just like, and all of a sudden I was like, well, they're laughing at me because this is weird or it's unusual. So we made all this money in 2012. And this was before we did any serious counseling, but we were doing a little bit of light marriage counseling about another thing that didn't seem as big of a deal to me. And I was like, I've always wanted a motorcycle. I grew up riding motorcycles. I had a motorcycle when Jody and I were dating, but it was like a crappy, run-down 1980 Honda that was a pile of junk, and it died right before we got married. And I hadn't had one since. And here we are succeeding. We did this great thing. We should celebrate. And you should celebrate. When you have great financial success, buy yourself something. That's okay. So I wanted to buy a motorcycle, and I wanted to buy a new one. And we went and did counseling over it. And I remember sitting with this old couple that we were doing counseling with, and they were like, well, what's the issue? And she's like, he wants to spend all this money on this motorcycle. Instead of going, how can we afford that? Or how can we figure out how to get this? It was, you shouldn't get that, and you should feel bad about wanting to spend money on something like that. And that's how I felt. So we're sitting there in counseling, and the counselor goes, how much did you make this last year? And I told them. They were like, whoa, it's top 2% in the world at the time. Yeah. And then how much is the bike? 15 grand. Okay. That's 5%, less than 5% of your take-home pay. And they go, this is 100% reasonable, and you should be going like, yeah, let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
They literally say this to Jody, and she was like, and she's like, well, what am I going to get? I remember her saying that, and I was kind of like, I didn't put too much emphasis on it at the time, but it was like, once she had to concede that she wasn't right, which was, in my opinion, it's very challenging for her because she's always right. She said that to counselors. I'm not perfect, but pretty much, Then she said, I want something. I said, well, what do you want? She was like, I want a new ring. Because when I was a touring musician making no money, I spent 3 months of my income at the time on her diamond. I said, okay, cool. And it was either that day or the next day we went out and bought her a $15,000 ring. And I was like, that's fine. It's also going to hold its value. So this is an even better investment than mine.
Right.
And we spent 30 grand on these two things, and it was totally okay. But that was the level of dysfunction in that one area, which was finance. So when I became a single dad, there was this fear that the kids would come and spend time with me, and I would be me and do what I deemed to be okay. And then Jody would hear about it. And then she would judge me for not doing it her way. And I think this is a big fundamental thing with co-parenting, that you have to realize that dads and moms do different things.
Oh, yeah.
Some do the same thing. Some are completely the same, but the way that you spend time with your kids can be different. That's okay to not be the exact same person. And it's okay to do things as long as they're healthy.
Right.
That you deem to be okay. And it's okay to have your homes run a little differently. But as an example, like, I think it's okay for my 10-year-old son to play Call of Duty. He loves video games. Or to watch movies that Jody would never let him watch that are like action movies where people, are getting blown up. Stuff that I watched when I was a kid. And he loves that stuff. And if there's anything bad, I tend to fast forward over all those little things, But Jody hears about that, and then I hear about it, So
How do
there's
y'all deal with
always
that?
this yeah. And I get that. Like, that's a part of the thing. She ultimately, what does she want? She wants what's best for the kids. And she believes what's best is something maybe slightly different than what I think. And that's a challenge. So that's definitely a huge challenge of how you go about that. And that's where the boundaries negotiation, ownership comes in. Hey, did Jackson said this? Oh, yeah, I can own that. Like, I let him do X. Well, I don't agree with that. And I go, well, okay. Well, the boundary is going to be that unless it's something fundamentally outside of our parenting plan, I get to make that decision. So thank you for that input. I appreciate that. I'm going to take that into consideration because I value your insight as a mom. And if I can talk to her that way, which we've tried to do that really pretty well, like me and her still get into things, but we keep that away from the kids, And I'd rather, it's okay for me and her to duke it out. The kids can't be a part of duking it out.
Correct.
And I have something really important to say about that. I think maybe this is the last thing I'll say, unless you have another question.
No, I like that.
This is amazing. Speaking of that weight, I see this from time to time, and there's 50 years of data on this. Talking negatively about your ex in front of your children, even with your body language, is detrimental to how they grow up and the kind of response they have as an adult. We're talking about whether or not they end up in prison, do drugs, have mental and emotional problems. Disparaging the other parent, even if they're bad, is so dangerous. And so there's this great book, which is old school. Most people probably never read this book, but it's amazing. It's called The Hiding Place. And it's a book by this woman, Corrie ten Boom, who was sent to a concentration camp in World War II. And her mentor is her father. And she lived with her father till she was in her 40s, and then they all went off, and he died in prison, in the concentration camp, and it's a wild story. The reason her book was written was because she was at a thing for all these Holocaust survivors, and they were telling stories. And she got up with joy and told all these stories about the people that she prayed for and the people that she loved that were the people killing her family. And people were like blown away that she had this positive response and cared about all these other people that were so terrible. So they decided to write this whole book about her. And then they were like, whoa, what do you have that other people don't seem to have here? And she tells this story in the book. Her father's a watchmaker, a clock guy. He did fixed clocks, which back then was the big, huge mechanical things in the 40s. And every month, once a month, they would take the train to Amsterdam, and he would set all his clocks to the main clock in Amsterdam. So he'd bring all these heavy tools and all this equipment, and they'd do some business there, set the clocks, and then come back on the train. And Corey, when she was a young teen, would go on these trips. So they go on this trip this one time to Amsterdam, and while they're there, her dad is having a conversation with another grown man, and they are talking about something I think related to sex. But it's sort of like she doesn't really understand the terminology because she's really young. And back then, that was not something that was talked about like that. So they get back on the train and they start driving back, and she says, Dad, tell me what you were talking about. Yeah, I want to know like the details of this adult conversation thing. And she says, my father did not respond. Our ride does not respond to me. And she's kind of like, what the heck, So they get back. They get back. And as they're getting off the train, he says, because this is his job, but instead he says, Corey, grab my tool bag and let's go. And of course, she immediately goes to grab it, and it's like 100 pounds. And she's this skinny little 12-year-old or whatever. And she's like, Dad, I can't lift it. And he goes, exactly. He grabs the bag, and then he says, when you're able to handle and bear the weight of these conversations, you will be privy to those conversations. I will talk to you about all these things. But currently, my judgment is you are not ready. So I'm extremely cautious as to the weight of anything that can be put onto my kids that they are not ready for and don't need to handle. They cannot handle. So I'm very cautious about that all the time. If I want to see them and they want to see me, but Jody has something else going on, and I'll go, well, I wanted to be with you guys, but Mom wouldn't let you. Heavy weight. They go, they're in the middle of it. So that's, I think, one of the most important things in co-parenting is
That
to
is
just
so
be very careful.
So important. I think I couldn't stress that enough. There's so many situations I've seen of people where parents do just that. They are upset for some reason, the relationship ending, or the other parent has moved on, and they start to do just what you're saying, and are talking negatively about the other parent in front of the children, and even talking to adults who grew up in a blended family, or not. I don't always want to say a blended family, a co-parenting situation, and they remember all of that. They remember how it made them feel, and their resentment now is to that other parent for even involving them in situations that they had no business being a part of. And like you're saying, that weight is so heavy that even to this day, even though my ex-husband and I, Maurice, we get along great, I still know how to get under his skin, and he still knows how to get under my skin. But we're just at a point to where we can do that in 20 minutes later. So, hey, you coming over for dinner tonight type of situation, and we can move on from that. But there are a lot of people who can't do that. And if you're in a situation where, you're still figuring things out, I think it is so important to never, ever involve your children in adults' situations, because they can't. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like a little curious about, you talk really well of your ex, like we just weren't aligned, but he's great. And I wonder how much of that is true versus how much of that speaks to your character. And maybe there's a mix of both, because that's my perception of you, just as we've gotten to know each other on this.
I would say it's both. I would say it's a little bit of both.
And I think my point is that if you feel like the other person is terrible, they're so bad, there's so much work, there's so much stuff I can do on myself to mitigate that. I can't fix them, but I can mitigate a lot of that with my personal development. If I go, okay, I cannot control anybody else. I can't control Jody. I can't control what she does, but I can contribute, and I can become a better person, and I can level up. And that's kind of my what I feel like I'm sensing in you too is you've made a conscious decision to bring a lot of joy into your life, to think the best of things, to make the best of a challenging situation, and to overcome that. And I think if you bring that energy to the other person, unless they're like a sociopath, you're probably going to get some good results, even if it takes time.
And one of the things I'm told a lot of times, especially from females, is that you're so much better than I could ever be. And when they hear about the way I co-parent or the way that we get along and how I am involved in their lives, they're involved in my life, and I guess the question I always bring back to them is why? Why am I better than you are? Why? I think one of the things you mentioned as well is that my son's well-being has always just been in the forefront of everything. Everything I do is for his betterment. Because of the way we get along, he's fortunate enough to have us both around for any monumental things that's going on in his life. We're both there. It's no tension in the room. There's situations of this mom I follow. She's a coach on TikTok, and that's how I learned first about high conflict situations. I hadn't really heard that term before until following her. And there were times when her kids they were going to a sporting event for her children, and if it wasn't her day or her week, the kids will look over at her seeing that she's there but afraid to come speak to her, because they know if they come speak to her, then the dad's going to get upset about it. And I just think it's so unfortunate that that's the reality of a lot of people, a lot of kids, a lot of families. And I think my parents are the ones who first set the first example for me. When I started the whole blended family things, my dad will always go back and say to my mom's, like, I don't even know where she got this idea of a blended family thing. Like, why is she doing this? And my mom had to tell him, because she grew up in one. And to my dad, it wasn't a blended family. It was just his family. Both of my parents were married before they married each other. I'm their only child together. They both had kids before they got married.
Interesting.
And so there was never any drama involved with my other siblings, other mom, their mother, or my other siblings, their dad. There was never drama. I saw them coming around to different family functions, and it was normal. So it was normal for me to do the same thing once my ex-husband and I decided not to stay together. But there is one other thing I definitely wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
You were one of the first men that I was able to talk to actually come and have this discussion about co-parenting. Do you find there is a lack of resources or people to turn to for fathers of going through like divorces and co-parenting?
Yeah, well, I would say maybe directly, indirectly, of course not. There's a ton of things indirectly, but that's a very important decision that a guy has to make, is development of self. Like that's something I've been very dedicated to. It's not been easy. Changing at any time is hard, right? You want to get up early in the morning instead of being somebody who goes to bed late, like that's really hard. It's hard to change something ingrained within you. And just to speak to that, like a neurological expert friend of mine that lives in Atlanta, who runs an amazing, he's a doctor and he's a neuroscientist. And he says we're made up of three pieces, which is nature, who we are naturally just made, how we're made, how we were nurtured as kids, because that has a huge impact on our development. But then he said the last thing is the thing we're constantly in control of, which is our habits. So I can change anything about myself if I just choose to create a really powerful habit. And most of the things we have in our lives that are not good are habitual. They're just things we've chosen to do over and over and over again. And sometimes there's something more serious going on with us. So I would say that maybe there is not that many specific resources, and people respond to direct calls to action. If you're in the sales and marketing, you kind of understand that language. Like if I say, I'm Zach Gray, I'm a luxury wedding photographer for couples who believe in love. You go, oh, if I love my other person and we got money, Zach's for me. It just makes sense. So if you don't say that and you're a divorced dad as an example, like you may not kind of understand if that resource is there. There's another organization here in Franklin that's recently become huge, working with the Army. They've got a contract deal for the entire state of Florida for all their employees, and they're called soloparent.org. And I chatted with the CEO a couple of weeks ago after I was kind of working on this single dad restart thing that I had just sort of picked up out of nowhere. Just was like, I want to do something. And we were chatting and he said, yeah, we've got programs all over the country, nothing specific for men though. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, it's mostly just for people that are divorced. And I'm like, I think people will respond if they feel like you're talking to them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. So when you say blended family, if I have a blended family, I'm immediately like, I'm listening. If I say we have something for photographers listen, or wedding photographers specifically, they listen. So I think that's important in the language, even though it's really kind of all the same stuff. Mm-hmm. Like the things that you've done are similar to the things that I've done, and we both had success. But sometimes, like, just having your face on the cover of this makes certain people just want to show up. Women will go, I want to listen to her because I'm a woman. I get it. I identify with her, So I think that's important. And there's probably some stuff maybe missing there. And last thing I'll maybe say is men have a really hard time getting deep into the deep things. I'm going to be 46 in December. And I still have a hard time developing a circle of guys that will see each other more than once every 2 or 3 months. Okay. Women will get on the phone. I'm like, sometimes every day. Right. They'll see each other every week. Mm-hmm. They make it a priority. Men do not prioritize relationships with other men, and they don't prioritize development very well.
And is this part of how you started your single dad restart?
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. Okay. I mean, that's 100% why. It's like, look, because when you get divorced, it feels like the world ends and you got to start again. Mm-hmm. You need to restart your life and realize that what I was doing didn't work. Whether or not you blame that other person has no, you chose that person and you grew with that person. We've got some ownership in this period. All of us do. Nothing is 100% the other person most of the time, with rare exception probably, right? So I would say that the goal there is to make a call like, hey, if you're a guy and you're struggling here, you need some help, a resource, we got to connect. We got to do this together. And I think there's some specific ways that you can talk about that with men that kind of make them go, okay, maybe I'll pay attention to this. And I'm a big fan of in person. Like there's just something special that happens when you're in the room with someone. Mm-hmm. So I want people to do that really well. And that's harder and harder these days with technology and all this stuff. So I'm a little bit old school like that too. I grew up in the late 80s and 90s when it's like, we came home when the street lights came on and rode our bikes around town all day.
All over the place, yes. Mm-hmm.
We were those kids.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything else you want to say about the single dad restart?
I don't know. I would say this. I would say if you want to restart as a man, I think there's a formula to it. Mm-hmm. There's another guy out there that talks about this in a different perspective, but I agree with him. And I think these are the 4 pieces, which he calls them, I think, power, passion, purpose, and production. Mm. Power is, am I in the process of falling apart in a relationship? It's really important to not let your physical self fall apart. So can I take care of myself? Can I try to sleep well, even though it could be hard? Can I try to eat well? Can I take care of my body? Can I exercise? Can I walk? Can I take care of my system? Okay. So that's important. Physically taking care of myself. That's the power component. The passion is the relationships. All the relationships in my life, am I looking at them with ownership, boundaries, negotiation, those 3 pieces, right? Am I curious about how to develop really good relationships and not have kind of generic relationships anymore if I've had that? Purpose is, why am I even doing any of this? What is my, as Greg McKeown calls it, what is my highest point of contribution? I love that. Why am I here? I've got one reason that I'm here. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your friends. Maybe it's it's something. You got to discover what that is. So the why, right? And then the last one is production. how is all this affecting the way that you work and the thing that you make for the world, in your work? Because a lot of times that's a big problem. Solo parent, when I talk to them, they got a contract with the Army and to help single parents. People in the Army have double the divorce rate, double the national average. I was like, whoa,
Wow. Right.
double.
Yeah.
He said, yeah, double. And when they came to him, he said, well, what current resources do you have for the Army for all these single parents? Because they know the emotional toll and the effect it has on soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we don't have any. They have not even prioritized the impact that divorce has on their soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
See. Mm-hmm.
Go figure, that
Mm-hmm.
there's so many problems relationally. So that's pretty cool that they're creating this resource for that. So yeah, I'd say it's those four things are the way to start. And looking at each one, I always say this. I say the first thing is getting curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
Those four areas: power, purpose, passion, production. Look at those and go, am I thriving or surviving in my body? Am I thriving or surviving in my relationships? Am I thriving or surviving in my purpose? Am I thriving or surviving in my job, the thing I do for money?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, get curious, get a plan, get some accountability, get some coaching, get somebody that's going to cheerlead. And when I say accountability, I mean somebody that's like believes in you.
Right.
Somebody that thinks you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And a great example of this, I've got a friend here in town. His name is Luis. And 2 years ago, almost 18 months ago, he called me and he said, all my stuff's in my car and I'm going to go sleep at my friend's photography studio in Franklin. I was like, what? He's like, my wife kicked me out. The police came to the house. I don't know what happened. I'm devastated. And I jumped in my car, drove to Franklin, 30 minutes away. And I just remember like hugging him for like 20 minutes straight. He's sobbing in my arms. And the two of us for the last 18 months have walked through this insane divorce he's gone through, like level 9 out of 10 chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And today he's divorced, 50-50 custody after spending $80,000 to prove that he's a great dad,
Mm-hmm.
counselors and coaches and all this court-appointed crap, and proven that she was really just trying to kind of wreck his life. And yes, they both chaos, but I'm so grateful. He's a great guy. All he wants is to spend time with his kids. He didn't see his kids for about 17 months at all. He's got 5 children, little kids, like my age kids. And it was a great victory in the sense of that the right thing, it's divorce is never an equitable thing, but there's right. What's right? And I'm glad that he got that. So I guess my point in that is that I've been in that on both sides of it, going through it and walking with others through it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard, but you got to have somebody with you. And when you do, like he'll call me and he'll go, hey man, like you were there for me when nobody else was there. And I'll never forget it. I'll be forever grateful that you were a part of my life through this. And thank you. And it's my privilege to be a part of people's lives, walking through tough stuff. And I love it in the sense of it has so much meaning.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of meaning there. And here you're doing the same thing. You are literally giving people hope on this show constantly. And this is powerful stuff. It's really, really amazing and wonderful.
Thank you. And that, doing this has always been something that was on my heart and something that I wanted to do. And it wasn't until about 6 years ago, actually, when I really said, okay, even though it took me a while to get to where I'm at now, actually trying to do this regularly. It was about 6 years ago. I had a client reach out to me, brand new client, and she was a newly married woman. And they were a blended family and they wanted to get their entire family together. So not only just their kids, but their kids, other parents as well. And they wanted to do a photo shoot. The kids really wanted to do it. So they wanted to do it for the kids. And it was at that moment I was like, okay, God, all right, I'm listening now. This has been in my heart for a few years. You threw this into my lap. Okay, I'm listening. I'm going to start doing the work for it. And
that's great.
Thank you. And yes, it's hard. It is so hard. It's even still hard, even though I'm at the place where I'm at now. There are still days, there are still times when this is hard. And I'm just like, I always just try to remind myself it's okay to feel your feelings. You have to feel your feelings because if you don't, they're just, that's just a disaster to me. Recipe for disaster, not dealing with what you're going through, not necessarily what you're going through, but still the feelings of things. But I guess one of my biggest things is just don't stay there. Get in and out
Yeah,
as fast as you can. Well, one of
it's
the things,
temporary.
this is temporary, right? There's brighter days, there's brighter times coming. It's everything. There's always a brighter side to the situation. But I
Mm.
like to end these recordings with asking if you knew then what you know now, how would you fill that in?
Man, that's a big question. If I knew then what I know now, like what would I have done differently? Maybe in the marriage? Is that what you mean?
Any could be the marriage, it could be telling yourself about going through divorce, it could be telling yourself about how to deal with parenting, be anything.
I think, and maybe you get into this in some podcasts, but I would probably say that the biggest mistake you could make after divorce is thinking that someone else you meet because they're different
Mm,
doesn't mean they're good or right
mm-hmm,
for you.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's something that I did really poorly.
Okay.
Is that so? Just because they're completely opposite of the other person, and therefore you think good or better
Mm-hmm,
or the right fit,
mm-hmm,
doesn't mean that that's true.
mm-hmm.
Um, it, so yeah, I royally screwed that up, and that's a whole conversation in of itself.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, it's. I think that's easy to do. I think it's
Mm-hmm,
easy to get out of one thing and then
mm-hmm,
want to refill it with a quick dopamine hit of romance.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I think it's very normal to feel that way.
mm-hmm.
And that can turn into a royal disaster.
Disaster. Okay.
And be
Yeah.
very careful with that. Like
Mm-hmm.
just chill. Just take your time. Because if you got kids, especially little kids,
Mm-hmm.
like you don't want them to see a bunch of dysfunctional relationships
Right,
over and
right.
over and over
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in control of that.
Right.
And that's my goal now, is to just be stable,
Mm-hmm.
as stable as I can.
Good stuff. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Zach. You were super easy to talk to. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks. I
I
appreciate
appreciate
it.
you
This has been
sharing
great.
your perspective for everything. I look forward to talking to you more in the future because I know I can see that you're going to do a lot of good things, especially for men. I feel like community is so important, especially in situations like these. It helps us to be able to talk to other people in similar situations and to see how people have overcome different things in terms of divorce and single parenthood and entrepreneurship and all the things that come along with it. So thank you.
Love it.
All
Thank you.
right. I'm just going to stop.